Upon vicious tides the galleons thunder, blood from the innocent to serve the being down under. Hey guys, and welcome back to another Conan Exiles video. Today we are on the far eastern island of the Exiled Lands, building the Inexian Seafort. This is a build I am really excited to show you guys. It's backed up by tons of lore that I've written myself, so without further ado, let's get started. Firstly, of course, this is indeed a speed build. As usual, I'll be talking through the lore and inspiration behind the build, alongside recapping the construction and decoration process, going over any difficulties I encountered during the build, and then we'll finally go through the finished build together. First up, I do indeed have a blueprint for you. This build is very, very large, as you can probably tell already. It's a huge resource cost if you're going to construct this without admin commands, and it's a very difficult build to consistently run well at high settings. However, this build isn't necessarily designed to be exactly rebuilt, it's more to present the lore and story of this build, but I would be very impressed to see if any of you can rebuild it yourself or even improve it. I think there are definitely things that could be improved. So I'm going to start with the real meat of this build, which is the lore. If you've seen some of my previous lore-based builds, you'll know I create my own characters a lot of the time, and it seems that a lot of you have enjoyed those characters. However, away from Conan, I also write short stories. These are generally in the genre of either dark fantasy, cosmic horror, or a mix of both, and I decided that I wanted to introduce some of the characters and factions that I've written in those stories into Conan, and I think we're starting off pretty strong with the Inexian Cabal, a faction introduced in a currently unfinished short story by the same name. In the story, a nameless sailor sits in a far-flung tavern, listening to the ramblings of an older man. Through the thick blanket of opium smoke, the blind, one-handed man tells the tale of how he lost his sight and his hand, laying out a story of a calm day in the northern seas gone terribly wrong, finding himself awakening in the brig of a ship, lay in a cell where the wood is so dark it seems to devour the light. You may remember that I introduced the Inexians very briefly in my training outpost build a little while ago, and I've got a small excerpt here from the book that better explains their physical traits. To put this into context, this is told from the point of view of the old man, who is retelling the story of when he spent a few days in the brig of the Inexian ship, occasionally receiving visits from the guards to provide him food and water. Draped in stunning black and red armour, these were far from the ordinary pirates I'd heard of. These sailors seemed extraordinarily intelligent. They all seemed to speak other tongues well. Aside from English, they spoke in a language I had never heard before. Rough guttural sounds mixed with raspy whispers and strange croaks from the throat. Such a language was horrific to behold, the sounds creeping from their lips like a demon from hell. I caught bits and pieces of conversation between the guards, referencing things that had happened hundreds of years ago, spoken of as if they only happened yesterday. The guards I saw were even more peculiar. Past the cloth and plates of their armour, I could see a pale body marred with intricate daubings of ink, the blackest ink I ever saw. It seemed to almost pulsate on their skin, though my malnourishment and lack of sleep made the smaller details hard to comprehend. Making eye contact was even harder, not for lack of trying, but their eyes. Their eyes were a piercing crimson. I've met elves, Eastlanders, Forsworn, and even some of the Obletus, but I'd never seen eyes like that. Such a gaze seemed to pierce my soul. So, at this point you are probably wondering, what exactly are the Inexians? Well, they are a faction of cursed sailors. It's unclear as of yet how their lineage began, as many of the Cabal are indeed related through blood, though their current circumstances are dire at best. Legend says that one of their ancestors, the leader of the group, was terrified at the prospect of death. One day in the Seafort's chapel, he dug a borehole deep into the earth and reached into the darkest depths, drawing forth the power of a blood-hungry entity from down below. By sacrificing the blood of humans to this strange being, it imparted its great power of blood onto the leader, granting him the gift of eternal life. However, nothing comes for free, and the corruption of the eternal blood runs through his veins and the veins of his blood ancestors. This blood sacrifice must be made regularly to maintain the eternal life the Inexians were given, or they risk suffering a fate worse than death. This means that, whilst they may look like normal men and women, many of the Inexians are actually hundreds of years old. The corruption of the blood has also granted them the ability to commune with the entity at the Seafort, allowing them to speak a strange language completely unknown to outsiders. With each blood sacrifice, the being in the borehole leaves corruption on their physical form, in the shape of pulsating tattoos and unsettling crimson eyes. The Inexians also have some other strange powers, but I only have very early notes for those at the moment, so I will save those for the future. As for what happens to the old man telling the story in the tavern, well, I'm not going to spoil that for you just yet. The current plan is to eventually release a collection of short stories I've written, though if you guys are interested, I think I'd definitely be up for releasing the Inexian Cabal on its own, as a standalone short story. In the long term though, the collection of short stories is definitely one of my goals, and it has been for a while. It'll probably include the Inexian Cabal, and a few other short stories I've already finished or partially written, including titles like The Rain, Rise Great Monarch, The Noxious Isle, and The Town That Lapsed, among maybe a few others. I'm thinking maybe a more fleshed out story explaining the Inexians' backstory, though, again, this is definitely a longer term goal that I'd like to achieve. So as for the build, everything actually went quite smoothly. I came into this build expecting nothing but pain, as it was a massive build with many different interconnecting areas and facilities, so I imagined I'd run into quite a few issues. However, I'm very happy to say this was not the case. I constructed the build with a clear Gothic influence, similar to the Dark Tower build from a little while ago, though definitely much bigger. Honestly, constructing this base was a breeze. Seeing as it's such a large design, I did run into some issues with performance and frame rate, and I did indeed have a couple of crashes here and there, but I had kinda expected that to happen as I finished off the build. I also downloaded 2 new mods for this build, AG Altars and Shani's Stuff, both of which are outstanding and really helped with the decoration of this build. It wouldn't have been anywhere near as good without them. Between the end of the construction phase and the start of the furnishing phase, I did make some slight architectural adjustments that you'll be able to see as we enter the build. I added a dock onto the eastern side of the build that wasn't previously present in the blueprint. This makes sense in the lore, as the old man in the tavern first encounters the Inexians on their flagship galleon, the Sanguine, which would obviously need a good place to dock at the Seafort. I also added a staircase in the courtyard that I didn't initially place there, and I also raised the rear towers on the western side of the build. Honestly, this was probably the best adjustment I could have made. It adds so much extra depth and verticality to the build, especially when you enter the courtyard. It really feels like you're walking into a truly intimidating Gothic fortress. Decoration was a bit of a pain for this build. It would have been quite inappropriate, I think, to include fancy bedrooms or a nice comfortable lounge, as that just isn't the theme of this build. The Inexians are so obsessed with maintaining their eternal life that they rarely sleep, and there are always Inexians sailing the seas away from the Seafort. Therefore, I try to keep things really dark and moody during decoration, including a lot of rooms that play into the occult themes that run throughout the lore of the Cabal. The lighting of this build was also really important, and thus I tried to keep things balanced when it came to placing the braziers. On the exterior, I went for a fairly simple lighting choice of Eldarian braziers inside the risers. This keeps all path through the exterior courtyard clear, whilst also providing some nice edge lighting that makes sure the courtyard is dark and intimidating, but not so dark that it's hard to traverse. Inside the build, I mixed Deathfire braziers, which emit a very strong red light, with Aquilonian and regular hanging braziers. Mixing the red light with the warmer light of the Aquilonian and regular lighting options turned out to be a pretty good choice to make sure things weren't too monotone, helping to cultivate an atmosphere that remains feeling imposing and violent without being too off-putting. As I got towards the back of the build where you'll find the small prison and the blood chapel, I gradually transitioned to more red lighting overall, to reflect getting closer to the being in the borehole and to represent its thirst for blood. So I think that is about all I have to say for this build. As with my usual speed builds, I'll be letting the rest of the construction phase run, and then I'll return for the furnishing phase. If you'd like to skip to the finished build, you can do so by moving to the next chapter on the play bar below. With that being said, enjoy the rest of the build, and I will see you in the furnishing phase. Finally, when the shell of the build was done, it was then time to, of course, furnish. Approaching the Seafort, the build really does have a very intimidating silhouette. The lighting works really nicely to brighten things up just a touch in the courtyard itself, and I've included some statues to make the area feel a bit more significant. The Angel of Death statue in the courtyard is bathed in a red light to signify the blood magic taking place within the Seafort. Entering the build, we end up in the entrance hall. This is a semi-transitional place that leads to 2 side rooms, 2 entrances to the courtyard, and 2 ladders that go up to the first floor. One of the side rooms holds a tree of death, and the other holds a small meeting place for lower levelled Inexians to gather before setting out on their ships. Climbing up the ladder in one of the towers, the balcony looks over the courtyard and leads into the first floor. The first floor is a rest place for some of the new Inexian members. Their reputation for eternal life does indeed occasionally draw people in that aren't blood relatives to the original family, and whilst their blood corruption is still fairly low, they are sometimes able to get some sleep. That will not last for long. Next we enter the inner courtyard, with the rear towers standing very high over us. On the right side is the expedition room, where the Inexians plan trips to capture sacrifices. They also track the movement of enemy forces that may challenge them on the route, mainly the Stormguard. Heading down to the courtyard, the focal point is clearly the blood pool, from which a statue of death arises. This courtyard has access to many different places, the next of which is a meeting room where the original Inexian family members can meet and talk. Next for the kitchen. The Inexians rarely eat out of necessity, as the blood sustains them, but some of them still choose to eat out of habit. This simple kitchen is exactly for those Inexians that wish to hold on to at least some semblance of normality. Entering the left side tower, this floor is a transitional space that leads down to the prison. Here, healthy sacrifices are kept until the next chapel session, and are dropped small bits of food and water through the grate above the cell. On the right side is a statue hall which leads to the Blood Chapel. This chapel is where the blood sacrifices are made to the being in the borehole, with the original borehole still sitting in the centre of the room. This is a grim room of death and despair, and the grasping tendrils of the being rise through the blood in the borehole, waiting to be fed yet again. Heading back upstairs in the courtyard, on this side is the torturer's quarters. Now, sometimes some of the captured sacrifices have some interesting information that could lead to the capture of even more sacrifices, so occasionally it may be a smarter decision for the Inexians to torture them for more information. Next, the masking hall. The Inexians here can use the blood at the table to mask their features for a short period. This removes their visible tattoos and of course their crimson eyes, which allows them to easily integrate and capture sacrifices. Climbing the tower, we reach the bedroom of the Bloodbearer. This is the original Inexian who dug the borehole and brought forth the being. This man is likely hundreds, if not thousands of years old, and he spends most of his time here in a catatonic state, awaiting the next blood sacrifice to maintain his eternal youth. In the other tower is the alchemy room, where blood is put into small portable vials for Inexians to refresh their youth temporarily on long trips. Below the alchemy room is the ritual room, where Inexians that have been highly corrupted by the blood can enter a fugue state, speaking remotely with the being in the borehole, using its own language. The being does not audibly speak back, instead it etches words in the mind of the receiver. And there we have it, the Inexian Seafort in the Exiled Lands. Thanks for watching. I've been really excited to show you guys this build for a long time now. I've wanted to integrate my own personal writings into my own Conan lore for a while, and I think the Inexian Cabal provides the perfect jumping off point for that. Let me know what you guys think of the lore I've written for the Inexians in the comments below. I am really interested to hear your opinion. If you like the channel and would like to see more content in the future, there are links in the description to my Twitter, Twitch, Discord, NordVPN discount, Host Havoc affiliate link and my Patreon. Or, of course, you can simply just leave a like and subscribe. Any of those are greatly appreciated. If you do choose to become a patron, you'll get sneak peeks of future videos, special roles in the Coffee Cult Discord, full-size blueprint downloads, your name at the end of every video, and finally, a brand new edition for the $5 and above tiers, custom-made Conan Exiles wallpapers in both 1080p and 4K resolutions, with patrons at the $20 tier being able to request custom designs. On that note, a thanks to our current patrons Sadialot, Randar, Connor, Blue Ivy, Velma, Torn, Maril224, and Eagle Rose. If you're new here, I upload every Wednesday and Sunday, so I hope to see you then. As always, take care, and I'll see you soon.